So now let's take what we learned about rigging and create our own custom creature rig. And then we're going to compile it and get it into the source engine. So let's open the Dragon Rig reference pose. So we can either start from scratch, creating our own rig the way we did with the skeleton. Also, we could use the quadruped guide as a starting point and then customize it the way we want it. First, I would recommend, before you start going all the way to finishing your rig, to create just one bone envelope and export in the game engine to make sure that process is working. That way you can continually export and see how your rig is working. Let's try that. I'm assuming you already know how to compile. Have our mesh. We're going to create a skeleton, 2 bone chain, 1 bone, and the second bone right in the eye. Select the mesh, envelope, set envelope, yes, middle click, and it's enveloped. So we're going to export the SMD, first the model, the reference, and then we're going to export skeletal animation idle. I'm assuming you already know how to export to the source engine. So I'm using a simple QC file that calls on the reference and the idle, the 2 files I just exported. And I'm going to compile it. Takes a few seconds. If you don't know how to export custom objects or props to the source engine, I recommend you get a DVD, Custom Props and Animation for Source Powered Game. So let's see. Recent models, the dragon. To make sure it's our dragon, we said we'd put it 2 bones. 1, 2. Don't mind, this is just a connection link between the 2 bones. So this is our 2 bones. So at least we know we're working. If we want to know if it's working, we're going to add a 3rd bone. So let's go back. And we're going to add a 3rd bone. Envelope. Remove envelope. Skeleton to the chain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then envelope, set envelope, yes, all the bones. Export, this is the skeletal animation. Export the model. Then recompile. And when we refresh, we should see our dragon with more bones. At least we know our process is working. Now the next step would be to get a quadruped guide, create the rig, add the custom features like wings and tail, create the shadow boxes and envelope, and export and see if that's working. Once that's working, you can go ahead and modify your weights, all the cleanup, and make sure your envelopes are perfectly fine. But before doing that, I would completely recommend to make sure your process is working all the way to the game engine. That way you won't spend valuable time doing things that you won't be able to use or getting into the engine. Let's see. When you refresh, there you go. You can see all our bones. Okay, so now we know it's working. So let's go ahead and create the rig. I'm going to delete the bones, remove the envelope. There you go. So like I said, we could start with a quadruped guide. I'm going to create a new layer from selection. That way we can toggle on and off. Now our guide. And we should scale it to more or less match the proportions of our character. And then start playing to where the position of the joints will be. Somewhere like that. So I'm going to go ahead and load up a version of the guide that's more or less more fitted. Once again, the more time you spend and making sure the joints are in the proper position, the better your rig will work for you when you animate. So let's load up the guide. Now that we have the guide placed with the joints where we want them to be, we're going to create a new layer. It's going to be the rig layer. Select it and go to character, rig from quadruped guide, and we're going to select a skeleton spine, and then we're going to create a tail. We no longer need the guide. And now we're missing the wings and a jaw. So let's go to right view, and draw the jawbone. And parent it to the head bone. You can name it to jaw. And then we need the wings. I'm going to import a model of the wing that I did just the same way. Model. In your noises folder, database models, we have wing. Matches perfectly. And the root would be a child. Like that. I'm going to mirror the wing for the right side. Go to skeleton, duplicate symmetry by default. There we go. Let's make sure it's a child. It is. So if we middle click to select this spine bone, we can see it's not part of the hierarchy. So parent, there you go. So now we have a rig. I'm going to save it as quadruped rig. Hide the dragon. So you can see the tail has dynamics. And the wings. Great. Next thing before we envelope would be to create the shadow boxes. So let's go ahead and do that. Just go ahead and create a layer for the shadow rig. Select it, select quadruped, and let's do our script. If we turn off the other layers, we can see we have an extra set of nodes we don't need. And then we're missing, if you see, this is a lumbar, spine, and tail one, so we're missing the hip. So we'll need to create one more for the hip. So we're just gonna get a new null, match all transforms to the hip plate, and make it a box. Make it bigger and name it hip. Constrain pose to the hip plate, and there you go. Now let's quickly envelope the mesh without doing any refining of the weights, just to see what happens. And right now as you can see, all the shadow bones are directly parented to the bones that were created from. So we'll see what happens with our mesh and our rig. So let's get the dragon. I'm going to save it as quadruped. It's going to be the rig with shadow. And then I'm going to select all objects in the layer. Nice. I'm going to create a group, which is going to be the envelope group. Remove group. let's see. Envelope, set envelope, yes. Envelope group, middle click, right click, and like that. I'm just gonna envelope like that without changing anything to see what happens.